men are the ones who are the rights givers.
But men aren't just the rights givers there, because a coalition of 5'9" and shorter men with women are probably going to defend rights more than a coalition of 6 foot plus alpha men.
But the distinction there is that you said it yourself. It would be a coalition of men and women, but it'll never be women. So it'll always have to be men.
Andrew Wilson and the woke streamer Destiny went head-to-head in a fiery live debate, and let me tell you, it was intense. Andrew didn't just hold his own, he completely wrecked Destiny on his own show.
It's just right now, we like the way that society works, we have a whole it's men don't do anything. It's the massive institutions that we've created around our countries that ensure rights. You don't get rights from men. You get rights from the protections that the institutions of government have guaranteed you, right? There are men in all sorts of different countries, but the rights that women have afforded to them dramatically vary from country to country, regardless of what man is going to protect them. You know, you might have the strongest male defender ever in Afghanistan, but it doesn't mean you're going to college if you're a woman there. And also, just when you compare country to country and you're looking for what are the most successful countries, it's not the ones with the most alpha men or the most manly men protecting the rights. It's generally you're looking for things like, do women have access to birth control, and are they participating in the economy? So I don't know. It's just it's a very crude argument.
Well, there's a bunch of things that are kind of smuggled in there, right? So the first thing is kind of smuggled in is you talk about institutions being the protectors of rights. Institutions are just a coalition of people, individuals. They're going to rely on the enforcement arm also of men. You say it's not masculine men who are defending these rights. However, it is masculine men who are in the military, in law enforcement, things like this, who are the enforcement arm of these rights, who these government institutions rely heavily on in order to enforce what their will is. So it always does come down to enforcement.
Do you think then that the countries where women have the most rights are the countries with the most masculine, strong men?
So they're not mutually exclusive or non-exclusive.
I didn't say they're mutually exclusive. I'm asking because you make it sound like it's just strong men that grant rights. So does that mean that if I were to look at all the women's rights in the world,
there's a problem there? There's a smuggle in again where you say strong masculine men are the only ones doing them. I'm just saying men is the default are the ones who are doing this.
Wait, but why do you say men are the default? We can run that back a little bit more reductively. Shouldn't it be 6 feet or taller men? Don't all men that are 5'8" and lower get their rights from men that are 6 feet and taller?
No.
Why not?
Because they don't have a non-equalization on force. A 5'8" person can defend themselves against a 6 foot person.
In general, do you think that's true?
I think that there are some advantages, but if you're going to do that, then on average,
no, not some advantages. I'm saying on average, if we look at combat sports with no weight classes, you think 5'8" men are defending?
Well, hang on. So if we're going to use averages, then let's use averages and say that we have an average for a reason, because most men are inside of that average, right? So if that's true, then most of the men who would be falling in these jobs are going to be within that average, Destiny. So
sure, but I'm just asking if we run this all the way back. So any man that's below the average height, any man that's 5'9" or lower, their rights are also being defended by men that are 6'2" and taller.
Well, no, that wouldn't be a direct correlate for equalization, because men who are 6 foot.
I think it's true that historically, men have played a big role in fighting wars and pushing for societal changes like freedom and rights. That's just how history has unfolded. Men were the ones called to the front lines, often because societies were structured that way. But let's not forget that women and other groups were also vital in those movements, even if they weren't always on the battlefield. Women organized, protested, and fought in their own ways to secure rights and freedoms. It's not about saying one gender did all the work, it's about recognizing the collective effort. Men might have fought in wars, but women kept things running at home, contributed to war efforts, and in many cases were the driving force behind societal change. So yeah, men going to war and fighting for rights was and still is significant, but we can't overlook the bigger picture. Freedom and progress have always been team efforts, even if one side gets more credit in the history books.
There's far fewer of them than men who are in the average aggregate. So therefore, the force equalization is different. However, if you're looking at the force differential from men to women, the average is so lopsided that even weak men can generally defend themselves fairly well against strong women.
If you want to do force equalization there, then shouldn't we be looking at people that prefer a heavily patriarchal society versus people that prefer a more egalitarian one? And the force equalization for women on the egalitarian one would be probably that most men would side with that over the ones that want the heavily patriarchal one?
Yeah, but that would go with my point, which is that men are the ones who are the rights givers.
But men aren't just the rights givers there, because a coalition of 5'9" and shorter men with women are probably going to defend rights more than a coalition of 6 foot plus alpha men.
But the distinction there is that you said it yourself, it would be a coalition of men and women, but it'll never be women. So it'll always
And
have
it'll
to
never be
men.
5'8" and lower men, I don't think,
No,
right?
it will always be. The default will always go to men. Men can always enforce their rights
Okay,
collectively.
so you just
and
want to
women
arbitrarily
cannot.
cut it off at just men, but not go into any of the delineations.
I just went
within
into
groups of
every
men or the-
delineation with you. Which one would you like to go into?
I mean, I already said it. I think that you could argue that like taller men are the ones that run society, and shorter men only exist in society essentially at the behest of larger men. Basically.
Yeah, but we just covered this. That's true. You could say that, but if you're looking at an average, then you're saying that the men who are outside of the average are fewer in number than the men who are in the average. So they're outnumbered. So I don't know what your point is.
I mean, it could be the slightly taller men could probably take on 1.5 shorter men. I'm sure we could find some average where 30% of men in society can run the other 70%.
And it's still
just like
men.
nobody looks at.
And it's still men.
Sure.
That's the point.
It is men, but now I'm going into height. But you want to go back on just the man, the fact that it's like the man thing. But again, and to go very broad, because now, I mean, I feel like we kind of see how ridiculous the argument is, and just like saying just men, just men, just men.
I haven't heard you refute it.
Broadly speaking, right, it's hard to refute because it's almost unfalsifiable because you're talking about half the population of the planet, right? Like, how am I supposed to refute that men are important in guarding rights?
There are
no countries that exist without men. But when I try to think of like, well, what's the refutation of this? Here would be an interesting thing. Do the countries with the strongest men have the most rights? Not really, no. In fact, just the opposite. I remember hearing so many jokes about how because Russia is so masculine and manly that all the trans Ukrainian soldiers were going to be getting murdered by the brave Russian soldiers. And here we've got drone operators, tossing grenades on Russian troops blowing themselves, right? So it doesn't seem to be the case that like just strong men are a good predictor of rights.
So hang on, wait a second.
Go for it.
So men can take your rights away in those other countries too?
No, not just men. Those countries can take your rights away. You need a whole
using
institution.
the enforcement arm of who? Which sex do you think's the enforcement arm?
Countries are powered by men and women. When the Soviet Union beat
is the enforcement
Nazi
arm?
Germany, when the Soviet, it's not just about the enforcement arm. Who's giving them the arms to enforce?
Usually other men.
Who manufactures the guns? Who manufactures?
Do you think that there's female gun makers all over the world or what?
Yeah,
bro?
who do you think was working production in World War II when all of our men were going overseas?
They weren't designing the guns. They were literally on an assembly line putting a fucking screw in a fucking piece of metal. They weren't designing weapons. What world do you live in?
That's great. And at the end of the day, both jobs matter. You could be the best engineer in the world. If you don't have somebody building your shit, it doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah, that's
right?
nice.
Andrew Wilson came prepared, no doubt about it. He clearly did his homework and had the upper hand in the debate. Destiny, on the other hand, seemed caught off guard and didn't have much to fall back on, so he went with the both jobs matter line. And yeah, it's a true statement, but it's not exactly a strong argument. It felt more like a filler response to buy time. Honestly, it's a classic case of preparation versus winging it. When one side has the facts locked and loaded, and the other is scrambling to keep up, the outcome is pretty predictable. Andrew's ability to stay composed and hit back with well-researched points is what sealed the deal for him. At the end of the day, debates like this come down to who's more prepared and confident in their argument. And in this case, Andrew Wilson took the win, hands down.